The hospital corridors were eerily quiet as Dr. Chen Mo slumped into his office chair, rubbing his tired eyes. The clock on the wall ticked past 2 a.m., and the exhaustion of a double shift weighed heavily on his shoulders. Just as he was about to close his eyes for a moment, his phone buzzed violently on the desk. The screen lit up with an unknown number, the shrill ringtone cutting through the silence like a knife. Hesitant, he answered. At first there was only static, a low, crackling hum that made the hairs on his neck stand on end. Then, faint but unmistakable, a voice whispered, "Help me." The words were choked, desperate, as if the speaker was struggling to breathe. Behind the plea, Chen Mo heard something else, a distant rhythmic scratching, like nails dragging across wood. His blood ran cold. "Hello, who is this?" he demanded, but the line went dead. Heart pounding, he immediately redialed the number. After a few rings, an automated voice responded, "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." Yet, when he checked his call log, the number was there, bright and clear. And then he saw it. The digits were painfully familiar. It was his wife's number. She had been dead for 6 months. Chen Mo's hands trembled as he stared at the screen. The phone had been buried with her. He knew because he had placed it in her casket himself. A cold sweat broke across his forehead as the implications settled in. Had someone dug up her grave? Or was this something far worse? The silence of the office suddenly felt oppressive, as though unseen eyes watched him from the shadows. Then, from the hallway outside his door, a faint echo of the same ringtone chimed. The next morning, Chen Mo stared at his phone screen, fingers trembling as he scrolled through the call history. The number from last night glared back at him, its digits unmistakable. It was Ling's, his dead wife's. But that was impossible. He'd watched the telecom representative deactivate her number the day of her funeral, the same day she'd taken her last breath in that sterile hospital room. He rubbed his tired eyes, the lack of sleep gnawing at his sanity. Maybe it was just a mistake, a glitch. He dialed the number again, pressing the phone to his ear with a shaky hand. The line clicked, and a robotic voice intoned, "The number you have dialed is not in service." A cold sweat broke across his back. But the call log was still there, time-stamped at 2:17 a.m., the duration showing 1 minute and 43 seconds of garbled pleas and that eerie, echoing static. At the hospital, he pulled strings to access the telecom records from the night before. The administrator frowned at her screen. "There's no outgoing or incoming call from this number at that time," she said, sliding the printout toward him. "It's been disconnected for months." Chen Mo's stomach twisted. He showed her his phone, but her expression only hardened with concern. "Dr. Chen, maybe you should get some rest." That evening, he sat in his dimly lit apartment, nursing a glass of whiskey. The phone lay on the table like a cursed object. He couldn't shake the memory of that voice, weak, desperate, familiar. Part of him wanted to believe it was Ling, reaching out from beyond. But logic screamed otherwise. Hallucinations, grief playing tricks. Then, as if summoned by his thoughts, the phone rang again. The same number. His breath hitched. This time he let it ring, staring until the screen went black. A notification popped up: F1 missed call. The call log updated instantly. Chen Mo's hands clenched into fists. He wasn't imagining this. Something was very, very wrong. Rain pattered against the broken windows of the abandoned hospital as Chen Mo stepped through the rusted front gates. His breath came in shallow bursts, the cold night air clinging to his skin. The place had been closed for years after a series of unexplained disappearances, but tonight the empty corridors seemed to hum with a terrible energy. His flashlight flickered as he moved deeper inside, its beam catching dust particles dancing like ghosts in the dark. Then he heard it. The familiar chime of his late wife's phone. His stomach knotted. The sound floated from somewhere ahead, echoing off the cracked tiles of the hallway. With each step, the ringing grew louder, pulling him forward like a siren's call. Shadows twisted in his periphery, but when he turned, there was nothing but the skeletal remains of hospital beds and overturned gurneys. A cold draft curled around his neck as he reached a junction. The ringing resonated from the left corridor, narrower, darker, the air thick with stagnance. His shoes stuck slightly to the floor as if something unseen resisted his progress. Then, abruptly, the ringing stopped. Silence swallowed the space. Chen Mo's heartbeat thundered in his ears. Just as he considered turning back, the sound returned, now accompanied by a distant whisper, too faint to decipher, but the cadence was unmistakable. His wife's voice. It drew him toward a door at the end of the corridor, barely hanging from its hinges. The moment his fingers brushed the handle, a numb chill spread up his arm, and the whispers sharpened into a single word: "Z." Hurry. The dust-covered floorboards creaked under Chen Mo's weight as he pushed open the door to the small, windowless room. The air was thick with mildew and something else. Something metallic, like old blood. A single desk stood in the corner, its surface littered with yellowed papers and a leather-bound journal. His hands trembled as he reached for it, the familiar embossed initials on the cover confirming his worst fears. It belonged to his wife. Flipping through the brittle pages, his breath hitched. The entries became increasingly frantic in the days leading up to her death. The last one, dated the night she died, detailed a phone call, a voice whispering help, followed by static and an unearthly wail. The description matched the call he'd received perfectly down to the distorted background noises. But how? Her number had been deactivated. A cold draft slithered down his spine as he noticed something else: sketches in the margins. Crude, hurried drawings of a symbol, a twisted circle with jagged lines cutting through it. Beneath it, her handwriting, shaky but clear. They said it's a warning. But it's not. It's a countdown. The journal slipped from his fingers as the distant echo of a phone ringing jolted him upright. It was the same muffled chime from his nightmares, his wife's ringtone. The diary's final pages fluttered open, revealing one last sentence, underlined in what looked like dried blood: if you hear it too, you're already part of the game. The ringing grew louder, as if calling from just beyond the door. The phone calls came more often now, always in the dead of night, always from that same impossible number. Chen Mo's hands shook every time he answered, his breath hitching as the faint, gasping plea crawled into his ear. "Help me," her voice, his wife's voice, the one buried 2 years ago. Then the shadows moved. At first, it was just glimpses. A figure at the edge of his vision, the faint scent of her perfume lingering where no one stood. But soon, she was there in full, pale and translucent, her lips forming silent words he couldn't decipher. Her eyes, wide with urgency, locked onto his, as if screaming a warning he couldn't hear. His colleagues at the hospital noticed. The once composed Dr. Chen now jumped at hushed noises, his hollowed-out gaze darting to empty corners. He barely slept. When he did, the dreams came, a labyrinth of crumbling hospital hallways, the distant echo of a ringing phone, her whispers threading through the dark. One night, he awoke to the sound of the ringing, not in his dream, but beside his bed. He grabbed the phone, her voice tearing through the static: "They're coming for you." The line went dead. The room plunged into silence. Then, the mirrors fogged, and her reflection emerged behind him, mouth stretched in a scream he felt in his bones. By morning, he couldn't remember if he'd slept at all. His reflection looked back at him with sunken, bloodshot eyes. The calls weren't just a curse, they were a countdown. And his wife wasn't haunting him, she was trying to save him. The pages of the diary trembled in Chen Mo's hands as he pieced together the horrifying truth. The entries revealed his wife's growing paranoia in the weeks leading up to her death. Whispers in the dark, shadows that moved on their own, and the relentless late-night calls. At first, she had dismissed them as pranks. But then the calls became more sinister. The voice on the other end wasn't human, it was a distorted, guttural murmur, repeating the same phrase: "You owe us." The final entry was the most chilling. His wife had written about a secret organization, a cult that operated in the city's underbelly. They targeted those who had stolen from the darkness, though she never specified what that meant. The last sentence was scribbled in a shaky hand: "They're coming for me." The call isn't a warning, it's a death sentence. Chen Mo's blood ran cold. The calls he'd been receiving weren't hallucinations. They were the same curse that had claimed his wife. The cult had marked him, just as they'd marked her, and the phone was their weapon. Every time he answered, it siphoned a piece of his sanity, drawing him closer to the same fate. His fingers traced the diary's final page, where his wife had hastily drawn a symbol, a twisted spiral with a single eye at its center. Beneath it, she'd written: "Find the source. Break the circle." But how? The answer lay somewhere in the shadows, and time was running out. The next call would come soon, and Chen Mo knew this one would be the last. The phone rang again, its shrill tone cutting through the suffocating silence of Chen Mo's apartment. His hands trembled as he reached for it, the screen glowing with the same impossible number, his dead wife's. This time, he didn't hesitate. He answered. Her voice was faint, as if carried by a distant wind, but unmistakably hers. "Chen Mo," she whispered, her words laced with urgency. "You have to listen. The curse, it's tied to the hospital. To the room where I died." His heart pounded as she continued, her tone growing more desperate. "The only way to break it is to go there, tonight." But her voice cracked. "You have to take my place." Chen Mo's breath hitched. "What do you mean?" he demanded, though deep down, he already knew. The silence that followed was heavier than any answer. Then, softly, she murmured, "You have to die where I died, only then will it end." The line went dead. He stood frozen, the weight of her words crushing him. The choice was unbearable: live with the torment of the curse, or sacrifice himself to free her, and perhaps himself, from this nightmare. His mind raced, torn between fear and a desperate longing for peace. The hallucinations, the sleepless nights, the haunting calls, it would all stop, but at what cost? With shaking hands, Chen Mo grabbed his coat and stepped into the night. The abandoned hospital loomed ahead, its broken windows like hollow eyes watching him. He knew what waited inside. As he pushed open the rusted gates, the familiar ringtone echoed through the empty halls, guiding him toward the room where his wife had taken her last breath. He paused at the threshold, the air thick with the scent of decay. This was it, the end, or perhaps a beginning. Closing his eyes, he stepped inside, ready to face whatever awaited him. The door creaked shut behind him, sealing his fate.